Hello fellow Agilists. In today's video, we are gonna talk about story points. It is 2023 and there has been a lot of buzz around story points lately. Alright, so a little bit history of it. Ron Jeffrey created story points back in the day. I think part of XP. Don't know exact time frame. And then along the way, Mike Cohen kind of put it in a book. The book was so good that I actually have 2 copies of it. Don't ask me why I have 2 copies of it, but that's how good the book was for me. Fast forward, Ron Jeffrey created a blog. Here's the blog. It basically says, I'm sorry for creating story points. Read through it, great read through it. It gives you kind of history of what his mind was thinking, what were they trying to solve as they were using story points. To set things straight, story points are not part of Scrum. Go look at Scrum Guide. It's not in there. In fact, user stories are not in there too. So if you're a Scrum Master or an Agilist, please be aware that story points is not a must when you're doing Scrum. It's not a must even in Kanban. It is a practice that you can use as a way to improve what you do. I do like story points. Now, if you look at all that everybody what people talk about, right? There's efforts, complexity, yada, yada, yada. Some people say story points are days, they're hours. Stop that. Story points is not an estimate. All right, hear me. Story point is not an estimate. Story points is sizing. Story points is basically comparing one story to another, whether it's bigger or smaller. And as part of story points, we use the Fibonacci series. You don't have to, okay? But it's one way, a good way for us to use it, right? A 2 is bigger than a 1. A 3 is bigger than a 2 and bigger than a 1. A 3 doesn't mean that it's 3 times of 1. A 5 is not 5 times of a 1. It is just bigger than a 3, bigger than a 2, bigger than a 1. It's smaller than an 8. As you go up the scale of Fibonacci, you can see that the numbers doesn't lend itself well in terms of where we can use math in it. 8 story point. Ooh, I'm going to break it down. It's going to be 2 stories. Wait a minute. 2 stories. Well, Fibonacci doesn't have 4s in them. So the 2 stories might be 2 5s. So my 8 now becomes 10. Or my 8 now becomes 4. Because it becomes 2 2s, for example. Or 3 2s, for example. And that becomes 6. Or 4 2s, then it becomes 8. Oh yeah, that's the same number. But it's not the same thing. All you're saying is comparing one piece of work to the other, whether it's big or small. Story point is not about you, about the person doing the work. It's not an estimate that you put on there. So why do we say that? Oftentimes, I hear the struggle of people adopting estimation or doing backlog refinement. They struggle. Well, it's a 3 to me because I know how to do the work, right? It's this and this and this. I'm the only one doing the work, so I'm the one that should be estimating. That's not the benefit of it. So when do you do estimates? For me, sprint planning. During sprint planning, we say, oh, it's 3 story points. Who's going to do this story? Joe, for example. All right, Joe, you take on this story. What other stories can you do? I'm going to take on maybe a 3, a 4, a 3, a 5, a 2. That's it. 3 stories in this sprint. That's estimation. The person doing the work figure out how much they can do. Not doing backlog refinement. So during backlog refinement, you're sizing the work. You're having a common understanding of the work. The conversation happens. What kind of work goes into this story? Compare this story to another story. Is it bigger or smaller? Is it a 2, a 3? So in this instance, you should have a point of reference. When you're first starting it out, you should have 1 story or at least 2 stories or created a ruler where there are multiple stories as a point of reference. Then use planning poker, great way to play the game, right? And that allow us to have common understanding, knowledge transfer too, believe it or not, as part of the conversation, right? The aha moment. It was a 2, it was a 3. No, it's actually bigger than that, right? That's the power of it. That's the power of story points. So what's going on with story points now is that we have Ryan Ripley basically saying story points sucks. Story points are trash. Throw it away. I kind of know what he's talking about. Why are we saying that? Because the misuse of it as a skill. It's not that I can't coach, right? It's not that you can't coach. It's not that you can't talk to the right people. It's that because story points have numbers. People see it. Other people that you don't have access to see it. And they're going to misuse it because they don't understand it. Some of you may say, hey, coach them. You may not get a chance to do it. And by the time the damage is done, what do they use it for? Calculating how much hours you should get. Standardizing the amount of work that you do. Everybody should have the same 3-story pointer. Right? Forcing that in. That's not real. Because guess what? Every teams are different. So, what do we do? This is why Ryan Ripley is saying, throw it away. It's trash anyway. Right? If you're using story points only between your team, then you're good to go. Anytime you move it forward, if you try to use velocity, I'm trying to calculate, right? At the end of the sprint, I sum up all my user stories I completed and add up the story point. When you add it up, that to me is when you fail. That's my learning. In the last couple of years that I've been doing this, that's when it failed. Because guess what? An 8 story point doesn't mean that there is 2 4s in there. The numbers doesn't add up. It doesn't always add up. Okay, anytime you add it, you just break the whole thing down. And what happens when we do? Then we use that to say, let's guide us and say how much work we can do. No, don't do that. Every sprint planning, look at the work you got. Individually or as a team, decide how much work can we do. So during sprint planning, as a team, decide. Look at your backlog. Take the first thing, the highest priority order that you want to do. Take that. Can we do it? Take the second one. Do we have enough more time to do it? Third one. Go through it one by one. Decide as a team how much you can consume. You don't need velocity. You really don't. So how do we forecast? Well, the process of getting us to delivering work is creating small chunk of work, right? And if you're having that process of breaking work down where it's small enough for us to consume and produce it in a sprint, guess what? Over time, your story points is probably about the same, plus minus 1 level. If it's around the same level, guess what? I would say count how many pieces of work that you do, how many stories that you do. You might discover that they're about the same thing. I've had squads that basically revolve around 5 pieces of work, 5 stories. They can remove 1 user stories, they can have 4 stories, and they have 1 other thing that they do. They end up about 5 pieces of work. Take a look at the data. You might be surprised. And guess what? With that data, what can we do with it? Well, guess what? Now you have an average number of pieces of work that you do. You can use that as part of your forecasting. You can use previous data, plug it into multicolor simulation, for example. Use that. Or if you don't want to use the multicolor simulation, do the normal thing. Do an average of it. Average of your throughput for the for each sprint. Get that. Simple enough, right? And that will help you do forecasting. Another practice that I see that is ongoing is the idea of this big rock, right? I'm going to size my big rock. It's going to be 2,000 points. What is 2,000 points? I don't know. 2,000 points maybe work by 3 teams. 3 teams all have different velocities. How do you figure that out then? You don't. Too big. Just, it's big. So make it simple. Don't try to be smart. Don't try to outsmart it and put math in it. Don't do that. Our instinct is actually way better, believe it or not. Look at how you produce work. Historically, if you look at the data will tell you something, and you can use that data to do forecasting. Up front, it is just guesswork. Right? How much work can we do? We're just guessing. We're using guesswork to do forecasting. So guess how good is your forecast? As good as your guesses. Okay? It's not accurate. It's a guess. But if you are doing continuous planning, continuously refining, how much work you can do, breaking down work to the right size and ensuring that flow is happening, things will go the right way. Use those data, all right? So if you are curious about, other ways of doing planning, simpler way, I actually have a simpler way. I've talked about it in the past before, way better, very simpler. You don't need all these story points, okay? Don't need all those things. So here's my learning. After using story points for a while, I come to realize is that story points, you know, it's great if you're using it as part of figuring out, you know, common understanding, figure out the size of the world, not estimation. So anything else, you're getting yourself into a zone of hurt. Now, some of you may say, great, it's working fine for you. Well, if it is, okay. But what I've seen, it always escape. It always fall into the wrong hands. And we always end up in a world of hurt because of it, right? So today, my thing for you is that take a look at story points, justify why you're using it. Is it trash? Is it not? How are you using it? Share in the comment below. Let me know. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong, right? Maybe just Richard has gone bonkers. He's gone way deep. I don't know. Let me know. All right, story points, trash or not? That's it. Bye.